Good morning if you are from wherever you are following us on this station of UBC this morning. Apparently, Kampala is tricky. It is raining, it is not cold, it is not hot. We were not expecting rain, but it has happened today. And I also speak now, many people are stuck in the jam, and I'm happy that at least the panelists who are on the set today were able to make it on time. We come again to you with the Pan-African Friday morning, and in Kampala, like I said, it's a bit tricky, but we are happy that at least we are expecting some rains, because the last few days have really been very hot, and I was wondering what was happening, because it is one of those extreme temperatures that we have actually recorded in Kampala in the recent past. In the studio today, I'm joined by Ndugu, Yuzo Ndugu Rugarama. Apparently, today the only lady in the house is not with us. I'm told Rachel traveled up country. I hope for something important, and she will be with us next week. But also in the studio, we are joined by Ndugu, who I normally call him Musoga Munange.
The JJ man.
The JJ Musoga Munange, who is apparently a commissioner in the Ministry of ICT, National Guidance in Kampala here. So we'll be looking at a number of issues on the African continent, and today we're looking at the connectivity on the African continent, how Africa is connected in terms of road network, in terms of rail network, in terms of air connection, also in water. And of course, when we talk about water, I don't even want to talk about, because much as Africa is all surrounded by water, I think there isn't much that is being used in that area. So these are some of the issues that we'll be looking at today. And we know you viewers, wherever you are following us, both here locally, but also outside of Africa, we will be sharing with you later on some of these topics. But to begin with, as usual, we start with the week at glance, how the African week has been, and I'm sure we'll be looking at the events that unfolded on this continent prior to this morning. And in that case, I will start with Ndugu Rugarama to bring us some light from the continent, what he has definitely followed for the last 5 or so days. Ndugu Rugarama.
Good morning, comrades. Good morning, dear Comrade JJ and Comrade Mtuta, here with me in the studio. The week has presented to us the long-awaited Women's Day.
Oh.
And I think I will just emphasize the Women's Day. You see, when we get some of these public holidays, a majority of our Ugandan population, unfortunately, as it is in other countries, they, with exception of countries that have been described as socialists, because they take keen interest and they make it a point to educate the citizens about the importance of some of these big days, the public or national days. But the International Women's Day, which was held for Uganda in Churuhura, which usually sees our all diplomatic missions, the ambassadors, high commissioners, and our national leaders congregate and take stock of what has happened over the year as far as the women affairs is concerned. This time around, you can see that Uganda in particular, because there was a representative of the World Bank and these other global bodies who are making speeches. But what happens in majority of the cases is that usually the figures, they are not easily seen when it comes to the changed lives of the people, because the interest that we usually want, the desire of the country is to see the figures, the amounts of monies being injected in the affairs of women, for instance, in this particular case, being realized. Of course, we talk about the enabling law and some of the deliberate policies as a country which they have put in place. And for Uganda, really under NRM, probably the spokesperson will say it elsewhere, but for me, as an independent observer and from the Pan-African point of view, there is quite a lot that has really changed in line with the women liberation. So
Sure.
I want to believe that the International Women's Day and the Uganda's case, there is quite a lot to celebrate. Of course, it is not yet Uhuru. I want to think really when they take stock from when we started emphasizing the women emancipation, there is quite a lot to celebrate about the situation of the women in Uganda.
Okay.
I will not go into the details of that. Let me just conclude my week by, first of all, congratulating all the women across the globe who have qualitatively and quantitatively changed the lives of others, not their own lives, of others. Because the measure of your importance is your ability to have changed the lives, cause the change of lives of somebody who is relatively at a lower ladder than yours. So I want to take the same opportunity to congratulate and thank all the women that have caused change in the lives of others, the countries, the institutions led by women across the globe. I want also, there is one of my young friends who said, please, you go when you reach, send out congratulatory messages. I want to congratulate the particular lady in Masaka, Karisizo. I call her Mwanyanaze Namubiru, Mrs. Warukaga. The daughter said we should congratulate her for being a good mother. And I'm very sure that there are so many other women out there who have made very great strides and impact. There are women within my family, myself, my wife, and I want to believe the sisters and all the women in this country, in particular, at different levels, ladders of leadership, without having to mention names, who have made meaningful contribution to the liberation of other women. And of course, let me conclude this by saying that the emancipation of women can only be achieved when we are into cooperation other than competition.
Yeah, thank you. Ndugu JJ, your week.
Yeah, I think Comrade has set the agenda, and indeed the International Women's Day is the in thing for the week. But on my side, I'm still missing the vibe of the Women's Day of the times. Because when you moved around Kampala, even prior to the celebration of the Women's Day, live for message that we are passing on the media platforms like this and the social media, but then the common people, the vibe was quite missing.
What do you think the problem is? Because something that I had also wanted to interject when Ndugu Rugarama was saying.
This actually I'm now sending a call because I believe that the Pan-African ladies are still around here. When I think about it, I say where are the Lydia Wanyatos of this world? Very energetic and vibrant and really pushing the thing to know. And here she's in the women movement.
Yeah, because there is this claim that the empowered women have not empowered others. I mean, those who came on this ticket of empowerment, in whichever position they have occupied, they have not let go. So the vibe is dying with them.
I think we must carry study. They may also be there when they're having their own challenges. They have been swallowed up by the dynamic times of today. And when we say that now, okay, let us, because today with the new technologies of social
Yeah,
media,
you do expect it definitely.
may-
But there's a lot of hype, in
yes.
some of these women activities.
women activities.
But Ndugurugaram, what could be the missing link in this? His point that that vibrancy seemed to
Yes, so that
be-
you,
to be-
you have
to be
the
low.
lady around Kampala saying that yes, or even the citizenry around Kampala, for example, around the city, the cities and urban centers, where it is always sparks off,
Yes.
to know that yes, Women's Day.
and you find men cooking.
You find people moving and really enjoying and really celebrating that this is our achievement. I didn't see it.
Yeah, but you see, I think we are falling short, and this is what we were saying, that in the socialistic, so-called socialistic or communistic jurisprudences, we have got a lot of presence of such days like this and others, because you can see it really, because when you go to the so-called communist countries like China, some Korea, say DPRK, you go to the countries like Cuba, and a number of other countries, not necessarily the Women's Day, but these other public holidays, whether national or international in nature. You see, and it has got a lot to do with the fulcrum that runs the country. Around what do you mobilize the people, for instance? Now, the vibe that Comrade JJ was talking about, and he's been around, so really he knows what he's talking about. We lack this old vibe that used to come with such public holidays of this nature. Yeah. And the question is, why? Yet we have got a number of women non-government organizations which should be mobilizing the people they are responsible for to make sure that we also feel those of us who are not necessarily women, we are supposed to be mobilized around the women cause.
Exactly.
And for a day of this nature, like the 8th of March, we are supposed to be part and parcel of the women cause, at least for public of the media, if you like. Let us also be seen to be buttressing the efforts of women. Now, the vibe is lacking simply because of these capitalistic tendencies that have eaten up our society. That we are no longer having the cause of women for purposes of genuinely uplifting the women cause. Because, like I was arguing, you find that a lot of monies, the so-called policies are being formulated, monies are injected into the women cause. They also appear like the African aid that we have benefited from the so-called World Bank and International Monetary Fund monies more than perhaps any other continent. But if that was going to be the center for propelling Africa to another level, then we would have overtaken Europe and America a long time ago. But it has not happened that way. In the same way, if the non-governmental organizations and some of these beautiful policies that we have had being formulated at the international level, and then the national, for the national level, you can see, especially for Uganda, you can see some meaningful advancement. But you see, because when you go on the politics, for instance, you realize that they will say there has got to be 3/3. That if, for instance, you have got a political leadership, there must be a representative of women. It doesn't matter that these claims we make. That,
across all spectrum.
They are unable. Yes, that they do not give good leadership. No, let them be there. They will run on the job. Then you go to our education system. There is always that 1.5 at Makerere. Of course, we can debate it also as to how it has contributed to the emancipation of women, but that's another debate altogether.
Sure.
Let it be there. Exactly. So the lack of vibe, which Comrade Mtuta and Comrade JJ are talking about, to me is as a consequence of what really drives our women agenda now.
Okay.
It is about money which is solicited from the capitalistic world, the budgets you know, and therefore, in a majority of the cases, if you have made the, you have reconciled your accounts and you have made your reports, those who give you money, you appear not to be enthusiastic about having again to account to the people whom you claim that you are advancing the agenda for.
Yeah, really. Yeah. So I think that has been, I think, the major landmark on the continent when it came to the celebrations of Women's Day. Of course, whether the women are benefiting, whether it is helping the women, whether it is advancing the women cause, that could be a discussion for another day. But I think all in all, it is something worth to celebrate, especially in the African context. Now, on the same continent, we want us to look at what happens, or what is happening in the Nigeria after elections.
But Comrade Muta, before we go there, I want to sound this call of action. We have observed that there's a gap.
Sure.
I think we need to look at what is causing this kind of disconnect. Yet for us as a country, we still believe in the mass line. The master of the people. If there is that gap, how do we cover it? I'm aware that now we have the Secretary General for the African women, Comrade Alice Kabayo.
Yes.
We are lucky that Uganda is hosting it, that position. There are many Pan-African ladies outside there.
Exactly.
I think we should be proactive and reach out to them and say, please, we have observed that there's this kind of gap where the comrade in Uganda, his umbrella of the Pan-African Secretariat and whatever, we reach out to them and say, how would we come? Because you cannot lose that kind of history. And yet we know that it's what has triggered off all these kind of achievements. There are many outside there. So before we go to that part, the other part of it, I think also we should put that call of action to our comrades, and we say we can now push it to another level.
Sure, because if it is left unaddressed, then we will see even more losing of energy on that front. So I think, like you are saying, it is important because Uganda is well placed, especially in pushing for the agenda of women on this continent, because I think we have done many things as first African country to do this on women. There are many first.
Exactly,
so
we have championed all that kind of things.
And we still are doing very well when it comes to women emancipation efforts. So I think, like you said, and this lady Kabayo is doing a lot of work.
A lot of work, yes.
Has been hosting a number of delegations that are coming all the way from South Africa to North Africa to wherever outside Africa to see the African cause. So the lot has been doing. I think it is one of the centers where benchmarking on women activities has been taking place. So like you are saying, I think there's something needs to be done so that we don't lose this vibe.
Exactly.
That Uganda should give leadership, and it should be done so.
That's right.
Yeah. So I was following up on the elections in Nigeria. Excuse. Are we looking at democratization of this continent? Are we looking at what does this show us when you look at the elections in Nigeria? First of all, I think the unfortunate back, and we discussed it here sometime with my colleagues when we were expecting that there will be this denial. Say, I think these elections have not been free and fair. That was expected, but also the insecurity that had engulfed the country more so. As they were preparing for these elections, you could see some of the election officers being raided and some of the officials being killed. So that was expected that we would have some of these issues. But it has not been helped when the leading contender gets 35. And then in the next one, I think the president now elect got 36, actually about 37, and the next person, this man I call them Lugwaraman Atiku, gets about 29. And that's when you add the other contenders, the margin is higher than the winner. And now this reminds me of the last days of President Moi when he was in office. KANU would get 35%, 34%. The others, the Ford Kenya, these other parties would get up to
The entire
twice the much.
opposition.
Yes. Now, but still Moi would be the leading contender and will lead. And I think this is what's happening in Nigeria. Now, that becomes very tricky. Because the simple majority against the majority could be a problem. But of course, I think the president-elect seems not also sailing out
Sure
easily.
about his win.
Exactly. So what should we expect from Nigeria now? Because it's one of the biggest economies of this continent,
It is
and
the
it's one of
biggest.
the yeah. So what should we expect, Bwana Ndugurugaram?
To start with, you see, the concept of politics on the African continent, the story has, in a majority of the cases, not been told by ourselves. And because democracy on the African continent is a handed down homework by the former colonial masters, assuming that they left, because I'm saying the former colonial masters. So the benchmarks of democracy, whose part of which the process of democracy is characterized by elections,
Yes.
is a very delicate subject in the sense that the benchmarks, the tenets upon which it rotates, is not something that is organic or homegrown. Now, at everyone given time in point in time, we shall always validate ourselves against the credentials as provided by the colonial master. So, including elections. You remember that the benchmarks of democracy as given to us by the colonial master includes periodical elections. That if you do not carry out periodical elections every after 4 or 5 years, you are not democratic. That is one. Now, this is not a formation of the African person. But ask anybody, including these so-called modern scholars, they will tell you as long as you don't have it every after 5 years, you are not democratic. They will even argue that the East African community cannot be achieved because some countries have got elections after 7 years and some have elections after 5 years. And therefore, because of that disparity, we cannot achieve the East African community dream. Now, Nigeria is a former colony of Britain, like Uganda, like Kenya. The political pags it suffers, the spillovers it suffers, are not any different from what the Kenyans suffer, not any different from what Ugandans suffer here. We have, over time, tried to overcome some of these impediments as handed down by the colonial master. I will tell you, in Nigeria, for instance, the formula is very simple, that you must get the highest percentage from your competitors. And that's what their constitution says. That, for instance, if you are all in the race, who has got the highest? Because I can assure you that if, for instance, their constitution was like, no, you must get a certain percentage, like it is in our case, 50 plus 1. Now, anything less than that calls for a rerun.
Yeah.
But theirs is different. Their argument, and this is another dilemma, by the way, we seem to be concerned that probably it is the dilemma of African democracy. I don't think so. It is almost everywhere, because even in United States of America, who claim to be the epitome of democracy, they have had those challenges. You remember the Al Gore and you know, they were counting votes using electronic, then they reached the point and said, no, now these machines cannot count properly, we are going to do it manual. But ultimately the winner had to be announced. But I can assure you that these challenges are not only that. Recently, when there was the issue of Hillary Rodham Clinton and Trump, they said there was an interference from Russia. So you will always have some of these arguments. Now what happened in Nigeria is that we have had, because the entire combined opposition, like you have correctly put it, has petitioned the courts and they have said they do not believe in the outcome. Generally speaking, globally, not just Africa, only that in Africa we hear a lot of news on the African continent. We take long to admit or concede defeat. You either have been rigged out or the process has been unfair, and you will have reason to go. Even in Uganda here we have got precedents, because the current leadership, you remember, the argument was that the elections were rigged. Now people have been saying, but you see, your Excellency, you are even not number 2, you are even not number 3. You see, rigging is rigging. If you have rigged the entire process, whether I have become number 8, I am part of the rigged exercise. So if it is me who has come out to protest, there is no problem. The problem would be, do we have avenues where where the grievances can be addressed? In the case of Nigeria, the judicial system is very proper. I don't think that now that the political system is being impeached, then the judicial system is also going to be impeached. But the truth of the matter is, yes, the current leadership, the president-elect, although he also didn't help matters, because I saw in his the vote of thanks he was giving the electorate, he said the majority of you may be unhappy because the president you voted is not the one who is standing in my place. I don't know who prepared that speech for him, but there was not cutting the tone of reconciliation. It was not reassuring.
He also accepted that he is not supposed to be there.
It kind of looked like that. But anyhow, he's the president-elect of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I am very sure that whatever happened. We were not there. I wanted to go to observe. I didn't. But I have got people there, including our former General Secretary of the Pan-African Movement, Dr. Rahim Abdulrahman Tajuddin. There is a center, a Taju Center. And the boys there were keeping me updated about what is happening. We have got the Pan-African office there. I can assure you that if he had cheated, like they usually say, because you see, the argument, when you get a high percentage on the African continent, those who give us the democracy benchmarks will say, how could you get all that? It means you cheated. Now the man is 39. Then they are saying he has also cheated because the competitors are so close. I think let's learn the culture of conceding defeat. Even where we don't concede defeat, let's have the grace to go to and address our grievances in other avenues, like the judiciary. And I hope this is what is happening in Nigeria. We should take a leaf.
Yes, Ndugujeje, do you have something on that?
Yeah, I look at what lesson do we pick from the African democracy, the way it is going, within the global context?
Sure.
Of course, I want to agree with the comrade Rugarama. The framers of the democracy which we profess to, they change their parameters. But for us, when you look at our African value and democracy, it was founded on a consensus, you know. Everybody comes and you agree and then it moves on. So why are we now behaving in such a manner? Are we preparing the population vis-a-vis its foundation to ensure that they participate effectively in this democratic process of elections? Those are the questions we should put across. And as Pan-Africans, we should be much concerned there. Who are the participants? Are our people? How prepared are they? Are governments investing resources in preparing the people of Africa to be able to embrace the democracy which you are talking about? And when you look at the studies reveal that across Africa, little resources are being allocated to the growth of democracy. I don't mean that they are not, but it's a little, maybe because of the resource envelope. But this is something that we should be able to scale up and know that now, before in elections, we should do a lot of work in pulling the people effective participation. Maybe when do that one, and then there's that collective ownership of the democratic process, it can change the order. As you equally said, when you get a lot of a big percentage, they say, well, you have rigged. But African systems, when people agree, they'll go en masse. When they agree. That's why I always refer to His Excellency's philosophy of the mass line. We tore the mass line, and the mass line is founded on African values. And if we prepare very well and do very well in that direction, people will go there en masse and be able to choose.
Exactly.
And we cover these loops of say, yes, you have got 32, 33. Like when you say that now, I know that it was giving that speech that the person addressing you may not be the person you had addressed. You wanted, you know, it's disastrous. So this, to me, I feel we should really reflect there and use the African, Pan-African avenue, Pan-African philosophy to ignite the population towards the democracy that we want to see in Africa, that can now lead us to a leap into the development processes, so that we minimize all these other so-called related offenses, going to court and whatever. Yes, that's a democratic agenda, but can't we prevent that? I feel we can do that one.
Yeah.
So,
but I think what we, like you put it, what we're lacking on the continent is a consensus, even on the democratic system.
Yes.
That we can apply across the continent. And because we're now copying this, of course, we have, of course, like you put it, some people take 4 years, others 5 years, others are 7 years. So there is not that uniformity that other people can copy, and then we can redeploy on the continent. But I think where we're heading, we need to look at that, especially now as the continent goes into these groupings of the Central Africa, the West Africa, the East Africa. I think at one point we shall have a common structure that we can use as a yardstick to our democratization. For now, we are leaping. And then I heard the European Union, because the elections are not fair until the European Union says so. But
what a contradiction. But I'm glad now there is a systematic process of ignoring some of these voices, because we have got quite a number of examples on the African continent where the European Union, for we who are not weekend historians, who take care to study the history and of the politics of Africa, know the interests of the so-called European Union. What they use as their yardstick of a free and fair election is not necessarily what works for us. So there are a number of jurisdictions where we have had elections on the African continent, and the European Union has said there is, or they have even refused, by the way, even when they are invited to come and make, to observe. But as long as African Union and other regional bodies come and do the observation and they stamp, then it is the election is okay. We don't care about, we no longer care that much about what the so-called European Union says, like it was in the past. In the same manner, we have got a situation whereby we are more, I think, self-supervising than it was in the past, in the sense that now when you overthrow a legitimate government, we have got African Union who are going to come up and say, we even don't want you to appear here to sit among the heads of states. Then we have got regional bodies like ECOWAS who are going to tell you that we're only giving you 70 days, you put your act together or we shall come for you militarily. And I think we need an African standby force.
That's important.
You see? So whereby if the African heads of state make a decision that no, you cannot overthrow a legitimate government, that is wrong, then they are able to say, we are commanding now our unit, for if it is in West Africa, please use air, go and fish out that man. They are usually men, you know, who do that kind of thing. You see, if we can have that, I think, like we have done now in DRC. In DRC, the East African community has come up and said, now we are deploying, we want to make sure that this insecurity is out and out. The MONUC and other these so-called UN security forces, please, for us, we have made a decision because this is a member state.
Sure.
But I want to ask Comrade Rugarama, if you allow me, can't we come up with a framework that can be able to direct the African political agenda and democracy? That's what I think we need to...
Yeah, because what is raising is very crucial, because in fact, you remember when this man overthrew the government in West Africa, the one of Guinea, was saying, where was the African Union?
Exactly. We'll talk about it, yes.
When there was what?
Yes.
No, but they see, that one was also not being sincere, in the sense that I remember, you mean Kano Doumbouya.
Yes.
Now, Kano Doumbouya saying that where was the African Union when we were having a lot of dictatorship here in our country, in Guinea, and now that I have gotten rid out of the auspices of the masses of the professor, then they are now coming to... But you see, we have got what we call non-interference. It is a policy. It is a policy and the African Union. And I don't know if Doumbouya knew that. If he knew, then he would conveniently stated that simply because he had carried out an act. That is one. Then two, also, where was that voice that came in form of a protracted guerrilla? Say, for instance, you see, we have mutant and we are persistently recording. We have been fighting. Why don't you come and help us get rid of this man? This was a smart coup, which we are not even sure that was organic and supported by the people, because we have seen in other jurisdictions whereby there is a coup and the masses, out of lack of choice, what can they do? They begin celebrating. Hardly 1 week down the road, a month, they are crying.
Yes,
we have seen that.
But it comes back to his point when he says, can't we have a framework?
Apparently,
remember, one of the
there.
reasons of these takeovers have been this issue of constitutional amendments uncalled for, like the amending of the terms of office. And we are saying that can African Union at one point say, no, I think there must be a limit to which this can be done. Then that will be the framework I was talking about, that even when you take over a government, an elected government, if you overthrow the government, there must be known sanctions. That will be as a deterrent to these unconstitutional overthrows. But also, when you are in power, there must
Guinea
be...
is under sanctions, you are aware?
Yes.
Guinea is already under sanctions of the African Union.
Exactly.
Forget about sanctions against the head of state and these close ministers, but as a country. Now, of course, the argument, I know Comrade Mtuta will ask, the argument is, if you put trade sanctions against Guinea, who is going to suffer? Because I can assure you that the refrigerator of Doumbouya is always full.
Yes.
And his ministers. He will have the supplies. So the kind of economic sanctions you are putting on Guinea are going to affect the ordinary business person. Now, how can we make selective, targeted sanctions against the people whom we want to sanction for the activities they carried out which were unconstitutional?
Exactly.
That is the debate.
And
for me, anybody inviting with that debate, I would gladly come. But now, we must start from somewhere. Somewhere is blanket sanction against that particular country.
Yeah, because but you also realize some of the sanctions don't have with their own effects. We have seen the sanctions in Cuba for all these times, and not a lot seem to be changing because those people even get more resolve.
Those ones are unrealistic. The sanctions, the economic embargo against Cuba is unreasonable, uncalled for. It is immaterial. Actually, we are supposed to go. I mean, there is no reason as to why, and it is not America. It is not America, by the way, which has imposed the economic sanctions.
Yeah, so
because the entire Europe, during the reign of Barack Obama, came and they lifted that. But because America's economic muscle and because of his sisterhood and cousinhood towards Europe, they will try as much as possible to hurt the economy of Cuba. So it may be any other jurisdiction, but for those ones of Cuba, even a P2 child knows they are not called for, absolutely, because Cuba is not a terrorist state, and America or Washington knows that.
So, but then we move, I think we'll have another day to discuss some of the things when you look at the African continent, the politics, how can we pathfind the politics of Africa, that the leadership should be following the Fatanyayos on the continent, because that is also very cardinal. Otherwise, if you don't do that, then we'll still be talking these things, then they happen again, then we talk again.
But I think it is actually critical that we talk about the politics, because the politics is a trigger to many actions.
Exactly, yeah.
Both economic, social, and whatever. If the politics is not put right,
nothing works.
Nothing works.
Exactly.
And I think it's high time that now these other regional bodies at whatever level, they concentrate on creating a unified framework for Africa, for where everybody agrees, and then we can be able to do that. It can fast track our desires to be able to put Africa to the space we want to be.
The other argument has been, of course, Nugrogram has been talking about the dog and not dog at all. But the other issue has been mainly the leadership at the African Union. I think there's also a number of things that need, because with time, many things will be sorted out, beginning with the Pan-African Parliament.
Yes.
And when you look at the composition of the African Union, because you are talking mainly of the heads of state who congratulate, in the assembly, and they are taking these decisions. Do we also need to have another force within this house that can trigger the other issues, that can benchmark actually the other issues that may not be raised by the heads of state, but at the same time, like the argument was last time, you are having a chairman of the African Union when we had the Chiseged last time, when we were talking about this, a man who also has a number of issues back at home, but has also now struggled with the issues at the continental level. Maybe the call is too big. So these are some of the issues that I think need to be looked at when it comes to the operations and the future of the African Union. Now let's move on to the topic which we are supposed to be looking at today, Africa connectivity. How connected is Africa? When we are looking at the road network, when we are looking at the rail network, when we are looking at the air network, when we are looking even at the telecommunication network, are we in any way really connected? And how do we see Africa in the next maybe 30, 50 years on what happens on this continent? Let's begin looking at the road, for example. How connected are we? And I think our producer will give us some of the mappings of the continent on how the roads are on this continent. You realize we don't have a road connecting Africa. Because there has been also that dream of South Africa, Cairo.
Cape Town,
yes,
Cairo.
Cape Town, Cairo. We have
even Osishe Rodman wanted to do that. That was his dream then.
Exactly. So, but even in smaller countries, connecting Uganda here to Congo has become a problem.
Let Congo itself be connected.
Exactly, even in Congo
you need planes to traverse Congo.
Exactly.
Then why would you talk about, it's only the UPDF which is opening up parts of the Gund, and of course some of our people here, they are claiming that we have not opened up our own country, we are going to open up Congo. Now, there are certain words I don't like using on the media, although I'm capable of using them, but it is just bad manners. But you see, thinking is not not for everybody. But I can tell you, if people who are thinking correctly would not be having such an argument, because it is the responsibility of the East African community to open up DRC. It is the responsibility of African Union to open up DRC. DRC is supposed to be the pharmaceutical hub of the African continent.
Exactly.
And if it is not opened up, and we only relegate the DRC population to music, as it has been known, and we stop at that, and we only leave, because you see, like Dr. Arkana Chombori has always urged, if you want to know the levels of exploitation, you just have to go deep in the forests of DRC and some mining centers and look at the planes which are taking off and which are landing. You will even assume that it is one of the busiest countries on the continent which are doing a lot of business for the people of Africa. But I can assure you, the planes which are taking off and are landing are not passenger planes. They are only planes which are private, and they are of a certain given countries, especially those former colonial masters, who are actually very present colonial masters now in form of neocolonialism, stealing the mineral resources and fermenting all sorts of trouble in that part of the country. In fact, they didn't want, and I think they will do everything humanly possible to make sure that the M23s and other rebel outfits in DRC remain very active, so that for them they can keep up their routing ways, make sure that they take all sorts of minerals from there. So the interest now, the connectivity that we are talking about of Africa must be historicized. This Africa we are talking about was very connected. It's just that our connection was interrupted when the colonial master came into the place. Because I can tell you that this Africa, or parts of Africa for that matter, used to trade amongst themselves. The intra-trade that we are talking about now, which is being emphasized through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, was something that used to happen. We used to trade with India, you remember the spices and what have you, which were coming from the coast of India, of Africa, and then they would go by the monsoon winds, and they would go across and reach India. You see, the spices, all sorts of precious metals and stones were being traded between the Africans and the other part of Asia. At the same time, these ones who are not civilized, the Europeans who are lacking in manners, they are the ones who came and started trading in human beings. That was not part of the commodities. But because they had nothing anyway to sell to us, what did they have? The only thing they had to do was to come, capture able-bodied men on some of these ridiculous ships, put them on ridiculous ships called Jesus, and then they would take them to go and develop the economies in Europe and America. But the truth of the matter is the connectivity, then, historically speaking, was there. It was rudely interrupted because even at the departure of colonialism, where we had these post offices, telephones and that kind of stuff, I can assure you all the countries that had all these national telecommunications, either they have collapsed, they have been overtaken by the private companies, the Airtel, the MTN, which are spread all over the African continent, and they are not ours. Maybe we can now debate the connectivity, how many people hold phones, what is the penetration of internet through a country like Uganda. How are we using even the internet, available internet? The disparity between the presence of internet, those who have the gadgets anyway, and how they are effectively using the internet and the gadgets for connectivity purposes. How are we trading, for instance, as the African continent, using internet? Here, even our bodies, which use internet, for instance, how many times have we gone to URA and they tell you the network is down and you cannot transact today? Several times. How many times have we failed to deliver lectures? Makerere here, university, top university on the continent, like number 3, has had to cancel an examination or even issuing of permits, and they say you go and do the examination because we cannot issue permits because the network has failed, we cannot see you. So in other words, even the presence of internet is also still having a challenge that we are not effectively using it.
Yeah, because when we, before Ndugu JJ comes in, before we even talk about the issue of connectivity, we also need to look at the colonial hand in that. because the colonialists didn't want Africans to be connected. For the simple reason is that if Africans were to be connected and then they were trading, then the development will be even faster. Because if you are allowing people across the border, they are moving their goods, they are moving services, they will easily be connected, and they could be a force to the occupiers. So that was one area to curtail them from getting together, but also trading together. Then they will have money and they will be a force. But the other thing is that actually this issue, people are talking of corruption. This bordering, the creating of these borders was part of the corruption. Last time, this lady, the former president of Malawi, was complaining that especially women who cross from Zambia to Tanzania, and it happens across all the borders. We have seen this even across the borders of Uganda and Kenya. People being, if they find you with magendo, you pay.
You pay. And
you are not paying that money to government, but you are paying that money to some other person. So that corruption was instituted by these people who demarcated the borders themselves. It is not ours, because Africans, like I said, we are connected. They were moving freely. But someone comes and say, no, now for you, you stop here, you don't cross. But because you have a relative the other side, you definitely would want to cross. I was told of a situation at one point across the Uganda-Kenya border that when women would cross with the money from Kenya to Uganda during those bad times, they would have money to be stashed and hidden in their private parts. We hear these stories, and I think they are not from nowhere. So it means that this, when we're talking about Africa connectivity, we shouldn't look at it as of now, but the history to it, that someone somewhere has never wanted Africans to be connected. Even as we talk of the African free trade area today, there are going to be a number of hindrances to that, because you know that if this population is going to trade together, they are going to be a very big force. You talked of the people saying that even the East African community may not be realized. It's true. Because there are many efforts that are geared against that, because East Africa, if it becomes one country, this will be one of the biggest economies of the world. So these efforts are not, we're looking at it today, but they could have come from back in the days. So something I wanted to highlight before Ndugu JJ comes in.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, comrades. One thing we must accept, that Africa, we are talking about the post-colonial Africa, is born out of many distortions.
Sure.
And distortions which were deliberate by those ones who are in power at the time, they put them there for their interests. And unfortunately, because of the times which we go through, we have allowed some of those to continue, as the Comrade Rugaram put, many planes landing in the Congo. But to me, I feel that now, when we have realized those distortions and we all understand that they cannot take us anywhere, then it's high time now that we rethink our approaches through the various bodies and blocks. But of course, that one goes with a lot of sensitization, awareness. And awareness, to me, has no limit and cuts across class. Because some people might say, when talk about awareness, they may think that now it is now the common base that must be made aware. But
apparently the commoners are faster, are moving faster than
those ones who we feel that now they should be able to fix these things. Because the ideological component of it is very important. That now those ones who are in charge in fixing policies, in laying programs, in implementing some of this, must have a common understanding of the African situation. Indeed, as we all know, we had trans-Sahara trade, where people were moving in the caravans.
Yes.
Where were they moving? Those were set connectivity between the East and the West. And there was all that kind of movement, which was pushing us to a certain degree of development and interaction And of course, that interaction was yielding to the birth of knowledge.
Exactly.
And the knowledge was now transiting and was really pushing us. But that one, of course, was distorted because of those other distortions that were put in place by the colonial establishment at the time. So apparently now as we talk, it is unfortunate that now you find the leadership, like in Uganda, say we need that East African connectivity. We should be able to open the roads in the Congo. And you find that some people are still urging that now you are doing it out of your own interests. It's very unfortunate, but that is a yardstick to show you the level of disconnectivity ideologically that we are having.
Yeah, because even if you had good roads in Uganda here all alone,
yes,
they are not going to be beneficial.
They are not going to be beneficial, and we should realize that now Africa, we have that internal landlockedness. So there are many countries which don't access the sea. So to do that, to make that kind of access, you must open up the roads.
Sure.
So that now you can be able to exchange your goods you are producing in Uganda, to be able to move them through the DRC to the other border, yes. And then they can get into the international market. That's a very important entry point. Much as when you look at the map, they show roads in the geography that they assume be there, but the reality is, are they there? Are they serving the purpose they are supposed to have? So I can say that now, in terms of the road infrastructure connectivity, we still need to do a lot, sure. as Africans, so that now somebody can now move from Kampala and says, I'm going to South Africa, and hits the road and goes there. If one, it's because all goods are not going to go by air, so that now you can be able to move from one point to another point. You can hit the West African market. Yes. You can bring the fufu along that road. And as you are moving, bring the fufu to Uganda or anywhere else, also along there you are tapping into business. And that one will be one of the ways of also mixing up the African people. And they appreciate themselves as people belong to the same continent with common aspirations.
Indeed. Viewer, wherever you are, we shall be going off for a break shortly. We'll be back on screen again to continue looking at the connectivity of Africa, and we'll look at how connected are we when it comes to the road network, which we are talking about now, and then how are we connected when it comes to air travel, and how are we connected when it comes to rail, train and train transport on this African continent. So don't go away. We shall be back shortly after this break. Thank you.
The Organizing Committee of North Chigezi Diocese is delighted to inform the public of the consecration and enthronement service of Reverend Onesimus Asimwe as the 6th Bishop of North Chigezi Diocese on Sunday, 12th of March 2023 at Emmanuel Cathedral, Chinyansano, Rukunjiri at 9 a.m. The chief guest is His Excellency General Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, the President of the Republic of Uganda. RSVP Honorable Major General Jim Muhwezi, Minister of Security and Chairperson Consecration and Enthronement.
The Uganda Water and Environment Week is back. Join us as we deliver value internally and externally by promoting a multinational integrated approach that links all sectors of water and environment, and also explore and deliberate on the water and environment resources to climate resilience. The week commemorates 3 sector days of World Water Day, World Forestry Day, and World Meteorological Day. The Uganda Water and Environment Week will take place from 12th to 17th March 2023 at the Ministry of Water and Environment headquarters in Luzira under the theme Water and Environment Environment for Climate Resilient Development.
Uganda Water and Environment Week is organized by Ministry of Water and Environment through the Water Resources Institute with support from development partners.
Yeah, welcome back from that break. In the studio, before we left, we were talking about the African connectivity through the road network that we have on this continent. And in the studio, with the Ndugu Rugarama, the Pan-Africanist, and Ndugu JJ, the Commissioner in the Ministry of National Guidance. Now, we were looking at the issue of connectivity within the African continent, and especially we were talking about the road connectivity. And we were saying that part of the problem is historic, that our roads have over time, because by now we'll be talking of roads connecting the entire continent of Africa. But up to today, we are looking at sections of roads, talking about a few roads connecting some of the African countries, in the East Africa, in the South Africa, the North Africa. But we don't have that network that we can consider the backbone of Africa, which can connect all these continents, these countries on the continent, that we can be able to trade. But like I was saying, that this has historical undertones. And when you look at where we could have been successful, and Ndugu Rugarama was talking about the DRC. Most of the roads in the DRC over time have now disappeared. The bridges have been removed or blown. And it's not only in DRC, actually in most of the countries where we have had wars, even if the roads are there, you cannot travel on those roads. So it is something that is worrying, and I think as Africans, we need to move fast if we were to have a reliable education, a health system on the continent. We're talking about now a political system that can, framework that can work for this continent. Now, if all these are to be in place, it means people have to move from one place to another, to learn from one another, but also to connect with one another. Now, if that is not done, both of these blocks that we're talking about may not be in place like he put it. But I think on the positive side, there's a lot of engagement and there's a lot of willingness. The African Union is doing all that it can to ensure that some of these things are addressed. They have put in place a number of frameworks and institutions that will be able to help the African interconnectivity. We have had, of course, when you are having a war, even if you have a road, that road will not be used. Like now, issues we have been having in Libya, issues we have been having in the Sudan. These are some of the areas. Remember when the Ugandans who are doing business in Sudan, they could not even move because there was insecurity. So some of these things on the outside, you could look at them as maybe Sudanese or Libyans fighting, but at the depth of it, there is some hand that is doing that for purposes that, like Nduguru Garama said, should be able to continue looting like we have seen in the DRC Congo. I think from the roads we can now move to the rail also. Last time we were looking at this, the Tanzania rail that actually would have connected up to South Africa. But
Tanzam Rail, I think.
Yes, you look at it and then you wonder, is it, one wants to put it to look that Africans are disorganized. Africans are corrupt, they cannot even build their own systems. But at the back of it, you find there's some invisible hand. Some of the issues that we had with the privatization, I think they were not well looked through. They created some of the problems that we are seeing on the African continent today, because one wanted to put us on the same scale, or where they have failed, and they wanted to test on the African continent. But these are some of the issues that we are looking at today. Do we, as road transport, because I think the only reliable line that would talk of today, especially in the upper part of Africa, was the Mombasa to Kigali. That could have been, that can be easily worked off. Oh, I know there are a number of countries that are working on the rail lines. Kenya has done the SGR rather. I think Morocco is doing that. Ethiopia has successfully done that. Tanzania is
Africa's pride.
Yes, Tanzania is doing that, and a lot, and then the South Africans are also doing that. But that is at the individual level, individual countries. But can we see this happen on the African continent? Ndugu Gigi, it was your chance.
Even before I dive into that, there's a point which you brought on table. Development of infrastructure is not independent of peace.
Sure.
And peace is a key factor in all these issues we are talking about. You talked about the war. But it must not only be that now countries that have experienced war are the ones having poor infrastructure. It's across board. So that one takes me to another factor which we should be able to look into, the post-colonial dilemma, where countries got independent, but then we still remain with this kind of aid dilemma. Most of this infrastructure is sponsored by aid, foreign aid. And of course, with foreign aid, you cannot expect to make the transformation that you need.
It can only be aid.
It can only be
at the
aid.
end of the day.
And I always love His Excellency the Presidency assertion. Says, no, we are not poor. We are not poor. We must fix African question. And indeed, as you ably said, Africa is not poor. We have all the resources around us. So what's the problem? We must interrogate the problem, why we are not tapping into those resources to create wealth so that can we now build the infrastructure that we want.
Sure.
Definitely without using our money to build the infrastructure that we want, we shall never get there. This kind of aid which they give us to build the infrastructure is just temporary. Within a short time, it will collapse and we shall not have the capacity to be able to maintain the infrastructure we need. So I think we should also look into that component. How do we liberate ourselves in terms of turning our natural resources into wealth, so that wealth can be able to solve African infrastructure problem? That's something we must look into. And of course, you talked about peace, which I think also we need to emphasize, that peace is a necessity in Africa if we are to now to build the infrastructure which will support the economic advancement. Peace is very, very important. Therefore, all avenues must be put in place to ensure that now Africa is at peace.
Yes.
And we must have that kind of binocular which looks through and say that now and makes us not fight proxy wars by some of those other detractors of our progress as Africa.
Yeah, because that has been one of the biggest problems.
Yes.
That someone somewhere knows that if I tell you that your brother has said you are stupid, then you are going to take that. Actually, last time currently there is I think it was whether it was a serious statement or a joke that has gone offensive to some people. That during the Women's Day celebrations, President Suluhu said Tanzania is better than some of the countries which are coming here to ask for dollars. And some capital somewhere were saying, I think she's talking about us because we went there and we told them. So in other words, one knows that if you manufactured a rumor against the other, then the person is going to be offended and the next thing will be a war.
Exactly.
So these proxy wars, I think we need to overgrow that.
Exactly.
That we look at issues. We may not stop fighting wars, but let's fight wars that are wars. Not wars that someone wants us to fight.
Exactly.
And that also comes into play. That last time we talked about it with the team here. The leadership sometimes, because if you are going to have a peaceful Africa, then it means issues of leadership have to be addressed. And if the issues of leadership have to be addressed, then the issues of the political framework I talked about has to be looked at, so that within that context we shall be able to have a peaceful Africa. But even as we do that, we should have points of reference, where we are coming from to where we are heading. And that comes into the other question of African leaders we are having today capable of some of the things that we are seeing, and to see the binoculars you are talking about, are they able to see the things that we are seeing today and things that needs to be addressed? Ndugurugara.
Thank you, Comrade Mututa. As early as 1906, one of the original founders of ANC, African National Congress, by the names of Comrade Kaisaka Samye, then presenting a paper in a university, Columbia, named Regeneration of Africa, argued convincingly that Africa must regenerate herself. That there are those components, and that was way before we even talk about the Organization of African Union. That was way before 1961 when Dr. Osejefo Kwame Nkrumah presented a moving speech in Casablanca. That was way before the acrimonious altercations between the Monrovia and the Casablanca groups. The Africa that Kaisaka Samye projected then was the Africa that had got to rid herself of lack of innovation, science and technology, lack of proper organic education, lack of intertrade, lack of peace and unity, which later in 1963, at the formation of Organization of African Unity, even when we had that loose coalition, like you put it jokingly, but it has been said by some people who choose to think in the way they choose, that the African Union now, the former Organization of African Union, is a toothless dog. And like my senior Pierre Lumumba has said time and again, that there are those who even argue that it is no dog at all. Whatever it is, the OAU and now AU achieved what it achieved through the physical liberation of the African continent. At least we do not see the presence of the white man, forget the fact that through neocolonialism, his acts are even more cruel than
When he's
they
here.
were when he was here. That notwithstanding, following closely on the heels of Kaisa Kasame, then in his regeneration paper presented in 1906, was the paper which was presented in South Africa by the patron of the Pan-African movement, His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, which was named the 11 bottlenecks to Africa's development. And he captured, among other things, the poorly remunerated and disorganized civil service. He talked about the ideological bankruptcy. He talked about issues to do with the infrastructure development, which is our subject today. He talked about issues to do with the lack of intra-trade amongst ourselves, and quite a number of them. Now, out of the 11, we are picking one, the infrastructure development challenge on the African continent, which I'm glad that we are debating. Now, the entire Africa, and you see the infrastructure development is quite a wide subject. The conventional infrastructure development challenge that we are fond of is things to do with the railways that we have been mentioning, things to do with roads, things to do with air transport and maybe ships on the waters. But there is such a thing as health infrastructure. We are not talking about it now. There are things to do with the educational infrastructure. How many schools do we have? How many proper technical institutions, universities, primary schools do we have? Adult literacy education, and how many hospitals, clinics, and other laid infrastructure do we have? What is our levels of telecommunication? Again, Senior Comrade Pierre Lumumba has noted that you will fly 6 hours within the United States of America, and nobody is asking about yellow fever vaccination, nobody is talking about COVID tests, nobody is talking about passports and what have you. But here, just to do a 1 hour and 40 minutes, or even 40 minutes in Kenya, you are being asked about yellow fever. The telephone contact, because we are talking about connectivity, the Kenya will have a different code, Zimbabwe will have a different code, South Africa will have a different code. In other words, it is cumbersome, even through telephone communication, to connect to a neighbor. We have got the dream, for instance, that was there during the time of the colonial rule, that Seychelles, who thought of having connectivity, opening up Africa right from Cape Town up to Cairo. When you look at the African Union Vision 2063, it envisages, among other things, the complete opening up of Africa, that there is going to be rail, very fast electrical rail connecting from Johannesburg or up to Cairo. That you are going to find a situation whereby fast trains connecting up from Addis Ababa up to Rabat in Morocco. But you see, these are, as we are here in this studio, I'm very sure that by 19...
I was from Mombasa to the Congo Brazzaville.
Even the Tanzania that we were talking about here, even you see, when you look at the connectivity, let's even look at the country level. The amount of jam, I can assure you, the amount of jam on the Kampala roads, for instance, the amount of time lost in the jam is equal to so much work lost in, if that force, for instance, if that time lost in a jam was converted and computed into work lost, there is quite a lot of money that we lose out of that jam that we are talking about. Now, that gives you, therefore, the impression that even within the country, we have not opened up ourselves that much to be able, because if, for instance, we had a train that would connect right from the city center and take you to Nakawa, go up to Jinja. If we had the connectivity like we used to have, to connect from Kasese, not just for the copper rivets, whatever they are, to come to Kampala here, but to have the masses, people moving. The amount of travel on the water, how many, for instance, DLEs do we have? Because you see water, you can put a road there. There is such a thing as a road. How many, for instance, equipment do you have on water to enable you to move very fast from here in Kampala, if you go on Port Bay, up to Kenya, up to Tanzania, up to all these places which touch on water. So the virginity in terms of water transport is so huge that we have not yet even 30% exploited our travel on water in order to carry out business. When you look at our air transport, apart from a country like Ethiopia, who is a pride, actually she's a pride of Africa. Everywhere I have moved, and I have a passion for Ethiopian Airlines, that in majority of the cases, I actually use Ethiopian Airlines. But I can assure you, when South Africa tried, you remember there was that cooperation, the three-tier cooperation in South Africa, Uganda, and was it Tanzania? That advert, there was where we wanted to combine and move as a unit. The South African Airlines is struggling. The Kenya Airways is struggling. Just recently, when our brother had gotten into the presidency, Ruto William, the airline workers were on strike. He had to persuade them. When you look at the air travel, the Uganda Airlines, our sister here, she's in trouble with the Senior Commission every now and then, that she's not qualified, that the workers are paying themselves a lot of money, that the planes are grounded. But I'm glad that we have got new routes now which are being opened up. Like Uganda Airlines is now moving to DRC. I understand we shall be doing long hauls up to Guangzhou, Shanghai, and Beijing. They are when you look at our presence, the cargo presence, even passenger, Uganda Airlines in Somalia, I think we are the leading there as far as cargo transport is concerned. So at the end of the day, anyway, the point we are making is that we, in terms of infrastructure, the opened up space, connectivity, you go to DRC, the entire country is not opened up at all. Movement is a nightmare. We are glad that we have got now the forces, the East African forces, and when DRC was admitted to East African community, I was listening to the president, His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who said personally that I'm happy, this is one of my personal achievements, because I had wanted this country to be admitted to East African community, because I know with her presence here, we are not only going to grow bigger, richer in terms of economic advantages, but also the people and the country itself is going to benefit.
Sure. Yeah.
Truth be told, as I conclude on this, if you indulge me, Comrade Mututa, there is less than 30% infrastructure development on the African continent, and that is a dilemma. The colonial master never designed that even after he has physically left, Africa as a continent must be opened up. And that is one of the reasons as to why Africa as a continent has got less than 15% intra-trade. That it is unheard of. You see, Morocco is more comfortable, and that's why it takes some of these hard decisions, not in regard with the positions of African Union, but because it trades more with Europe than it trades with Africa. It has got a lot to lose if it does not please the European Union, because all her tomatoes and other related vegetables find their way on the European market than they find their way on the African market. Now, when you look at what the Vision 2063 of the African Union espouses, when you look at the agency of the African Union, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area espouses, and they have started on it, by the way, when you look at the activities in Accra, Ghana, the Secretariat of Africa Continental Free Trade Area, you can see that we are at a certain point in time, the development trajectory, because the Africa Continental Free Trade Area also espouses opening up Africa to increase the intra-trade. At the same time, they are looking at engaging the youth and women who are actually a critical mass, because Africa has got the youngest population, meaning that her ability to transform herself lies in the hands of the able-bodied people. And therefore, as far as going forward is concerned, we have got the right mindset, we have got the right framework. We can only now improve on the resource envelope by making sure that the amount of money in Africa, in the Africa Development Bank, is sufficient to enable us to carry out our projects, because if we must rely on World Bank money, we are going to have a problem, or to rely on advanced countries like China, Russia, 100%. They are going to dictate the African development agenda, including the infrastructure development, because you know, me and you know, and everybody here in this studio, that we have been having a problem of not carrying out heavy infrastructure development on the African continent, because the money that would come to us was coming with associated trappings, the tags. You go do this, put this money to this function, don't carry out development of hydroelectricity power, because you are going to be damaging the environment. And that is why the presentation of His Excellency Yoweri Museveni again, when they were called to America during Barack Obama's time, and I want to conclude with this. He said that we are going to utilize all the resources that can generate power on the African continent, because power is a vehicle to development. If you put together all the river system on the African continent, it will produce less than 1 million megawatts of energy. It means, therefore, that for us, we are going to venture into other areas, including nuclear energy, not for purposes of developing nuclear weapons, but nuclear energy for purposes of forming a proper engine to drive the African economy. Unless, these were his words, unless there is scientific proof that can be given to us that Africa are not supposed, they are allergic and they are not supposed to be exposed to energy, even if that energy was nuclear energy, and therefore they should only remain where they are. If there is such a scientific proof and the results, such absurd results are presented, then we are not going to venture there. But as long as we realize that energy, including nuclear energy, is a vehicle to development, then Africa is mandated, and it is her right to make sure that we tap into that and make our continent develop at our own terms.
Sure. Yeah, when we look at figures from the aviation, the air transport, you realize that Africa holds 17% of the world population. Now, with 17% of the world population, still our market share in terms of aviation, air transport, is miserable 3%. And then, of course, by saying Africans are not traveling, but of course, when you look at how many people are traveling and for whatever reasons they're traveling, if trade has already been curtailed back at home, then what are you traveling doing other than maybe people going to China to pick some mechanics, or going to Europe for studies, and to India for medical attention. So you realize that we are not traveling that much, but there are reasons again that why Africa is not traveling that much. He raised one of the issues that you can travel the whole of America, and you can even go even the other parts of Europe without someone asking you all these documents that they're asking you have. And for me, sometimes I get offended when you move the next African country and they're asking you all these silly questions, which they have been coached by someone to ask. Definitely. When the last time did you hear of yellow fever anyway, in any of outbreak in any of the African countries or in the neighboring? I think there are many other questions that we need to ask more than that. But again, when you look at the market share for of course, on Africa, I think the biggest airlines we have are now, like he put Ethiopian Airline, we have the Kenya Airways, we have the South African Airways, there's also Air Mauritius, and then the Royal Morocco. These are some of the few airlines that fly this continent. But even with that, you realize the biggest shareholders who have the biggest share in terms of the market are the airlines from outside Africa. The Air Brussels, KLM, yeah, also then the American airlines that fly to South Africa, and now the Emirates. But
Turkish.
Yeah, and the Turkish also, I think Turkish is one of the biggest. But now you wonder, why is it that people can come from elsewhere to Africa and make more money, and for us, we are not even able to make that money, and then you are claiming that Africans are not traveling. I think there is a...
That's the dilemma we are talking about.
There is a problem there.
Yes, that's the dilemma.
Yeah. So, but again, I think it is also important that the the governments need to move fast, because African Union is pushing for a single airline operation, that we don't have to, when you are flying from South Africa, you have to pay all those costs because you are flying through some people's airspace. We need to open up this airspace. Of course, Uganda is one among the countries that are saying, maybe when we do that, we are going to open a lot to competition, and maybe we are not capable in that competition. Maybe we need time that we build capacity, that even as we open the airspace, I think Uganda and Tanzania and some other country in Africa who are saying, no, please, let's wait. Let's first build our capacity so that when we have open space or open skies, we can compete. But I think the irony has been that if you wanted to go, and again, back to the colonial hand, that if you wanted to go to Nigeria from Uganda, you will have to fly in the past, in one of the, even up to now, you will have to fly outside of Africa, then come back to Nigeria. Last time I felt, but we were going to Mauritius. And when you fly from here to Tanzania, because between Tanzania and Mauritius you take about 2 hours, and you are in Mauritius. And when you connect from maybe 1 hour from here to Dar es Salaam, then from 3 hours you are in Mauritius. But we flew to the Arab world, spent there a day, then the following day we had to reach Mauritius. You take 7 hours from here to Dubai, and you are taking another 7 hours from Dubai to Mauritius, and that's the following day. You see, so when you are looking at the connectivity of Africa, it is not that Africans are not able to connect, but they are reasons. There are still those roadblocks that we have to overcome as Africans. And of course,
you don't have your own careers.
Exactly. So that is something that the African Union needs to look at, and the African leadership now needs to open eyes to see that we need to move. Other than that, I think we still have problems. But like you said, you raised the issue of also funding. How committed are we to raise some of this money when you're talking about the road. Where are we getting this money? Maybe we're borrowing. So I think I want you to come back on that.
But Comrade Dr. Magufuli gave us a very vivid and live example that you do not have to borrow money to carry out major developments, infrastructure developments even at that. When you look at all the flyovers, the highways in Dar, and you've been there, when you look at some of the electricity that has been is littered all over the cities of Tanzania, all this money, in spite of the fact that there are some countries like China and others who came to him claiming that they can give him the money at extremely low rates, and he never took that money. But when you look at now the amount of development, infrastructure development that he was able to carry out in his country,
Yes.
I can assure you that we can carry out these major developments, and we can even go region by region, because we already have the regional economic blocks, even if we were to follow that. And the recapitalization of our own Africa Development Bank is also not a hard thing. It's not a hard paper. We can manage to recapitalize our own Africa Development Bank, and we ensure that we supervise the money that is given to different countries. If our niche, for instance, is agriculture, like the former Africa Development Bank CEO used to say, that the richest continent by 2040 is going to be that continent that has got an edge in agriculture.
And where is he?
Wait a minute. He went ahead to say that we should not look, the problem of Africa is that we have for a very long time looked at agriculture as not as a business. We look at agriculture as a form of domestic activity. But the moment we change our perspective, the perception of agriculture, and we look at it as a business, is the day we are going, and he projected that by 2040 we are going to be a different continent. Then I realized this man was gone. And indeed, like you have asked, where is he now? There is no way you can maintain such a brain. And that's what we must fight, by the way. The challenge is that the infrastructure development on the African continent, which is one of the pillars upon which Africa as a continent is going to develop. The connectivity on the African continent, which is a dilemma, is going to be solved when we retain a brain. We first of all have to develop that brain. Now, when we already have it, it is not a given, because there are the hawks around who are looking around to make sure that they either by persuasion or force eliminate such a brain. Let's preserve that brain. Let's make sure that that brain is put to use. We recapitalize our Africa Development Bank. We answer the question of leadership. Chinua Achebe writes about Nigeria. He says the problem of Nigeria is leadership. And I think that is what Comrade JJ here was saying, that let us ask questions and interrogate the concept of leadership. The political leadership is a Magna Carta for transformation across the board.
Sure.
If we do not answer the question of leadership on the political leadership on the African continent, we are going to get the rest of the math very wrong.
Yes, Ndugu JJ was coming in, of course, with the issue was that, so we have all this, we have all these capacities, we have all these available opportunities, but again, as it comes to leadership, what is the major problem?
Africa faces an infrastructural development dilemma, as well put, if we don't do 1 or 2, 3 things. Number one, if we don't now rethink and repackage our approaches, so that now Africa will drive our agenda as a body. You can find that now as has been mentioned, there have been many brains but they have been operating in silos, and therefore they become vulnerable. And when they are vulnerable, they are easily identified and destroyed. But if I operate as a body, they will develop the strength. That's why the cry for East African community is a living approach that must be able to deliver the development of East Africa as a bloc. The cry for African Union must be translated from rubber stamping and the laissez-faire into a very effective, active body. The cry for IGAD to work along various approaches of peace and West must be seen to be moving as a body. If we continue operating in silos, we shall never move.
Sure.
That's something that must be blessed, that must be fast-tracked. And we believe that the opportunity is there. But the driver to that kind of unity of purpose is what has always been referred to as the thought system. Are we sharing a common ideology? Are we looking at our issues with a common binocular, as I said? What's our guiding philosophy? When you look at the African Vision 2063, a very rich vision, but is it seen? To me, I feel that there's that gap of making it seen and making it live. And where should it start from? It should permeate from up there, up to all the bodies across the African globe. So that a child in Morocco sings the same philosophy with a child from Uganda or from Zimbabwe or from Lesotho, name it. But unfortunately, our adversaries don't want us to go in that direction. And now, if this we know that our adversaries don't want us to go in that direction, it's again that body now, which identify that now there's that kind of roadblock, and they find methodologies of permeating their literature, the philosophy, the culture into the entire population of Africa. Then we can say that, okay, fine, our projection in 2063 will be this. The areas of action are A, B, C, D. How shall we build that culture through all these programs, which are universal across the African continent? Then we can be able to solve the infrastructure development dilemma. I was one time having a conversation with a friend of mine who had traveled outside the country. Then when he came back, we were conversing. He said, Comrade JJ, I wonder whether some of our leaders traveled some of these countries.
I also sometimes think so.
Because you move to some countries, you see the infrastructure in terms of roads. They are wide. 4 vehicles are flowing this other side and 4 the other side.
Exactly.
Therefore, they minimize on the time they take on the road.
You have a road running into the sea.
A road running into the sea. They are the metropoles, which are developed under the ground, yes. And then you move underground.
Of the English Channel, the train runs under the water.
Runs under the water. And if our people are moving and they are seeing, why can't they apply it now? And we have got examples across Africa, even within East Africa, where I've seen countries that are moving that direction. You have talked about
Mauritania and Egypt are actually doing a wonderful job.
Yes.
In terms of being opened up.
Exactly. You have talked about starting small, what has happened in Tanzania. When you look at Ethiopia, road system, infrastructure development, yet they also face the same wrath of the global interventions.
So our problem there, JJ, if you will permit me just a second. Yes. Our problem there is, for instance, when you look at even Mauritania, even Egypt, when you go to Addis, and we've been to Addis regularly, we go there. Our problem is on the African continent is that local content. Who, for instance, is the supervising engineer? How much of the local content the engineers are on that road, from the Bole International Airport up to the African Union head offices? Who is working on that road? Yes. When you look at the Grand Renaissance Dam, fantastic, because the issue with Ethiopia is that it wants to be a continental power supplier, that all these countries should be able to tap on the energy generated by Ethiopia. Now, the question is, on the Great Renaissance Dam, what is the local content? How many Ethiopian engineers are there, and what are they doing? What is their contribution? It is mainly a Chinese project, and no wonder it was being sabotaged by the conceptual West through using Egypt and Sudan because of those old colonial arguments about the River Nile.
Yes.
But my concern, and I want to believe this is the concern of majority of those who choose to think through some of these issues, is that yes, we intend to open up Africa. We have got these fantastic universities and institutions of learning, high institutions of learning into the engineering. But from when we started producing these engineers and other related technicians in that area,
But of course, the other
what
question,
is the local content?
The other question
Yes.
you are raising is what type of engineers are you producing?
That is the problem now. And why should we continue with the wrong education for such a long period of time?
That's why I was talking about we must reinvent ourselves.
So the
regeneration of Africa
as
is very
was
critical.
Sure.
It's very, very critical at this time in history. It's very, very critical. And at the same time, because regeneration of Africa is not independent of other, let's say, infrastructure, it's not dependent of other protocols. We must go and look into the international protocols that were put there by the time. How do we revisit the Nairobi Protocol? Using the framework which is around us, non-antagonistic, but then progressive, and then we visit that one. We also visit, what about the local content which talk about? How do we now get these engineers, reassemble them into a theater so that we reshape their thinking and their capabilities vis-a-vis now the digital age, because the digital age is also around. But that one is something that can be done. I want to see African Union when championing that agenda. It's an African Center of Excellence.
Exactly.
Rebuilding, reshaping the engineers who are going to reshape our infrastructure development to create that connectivity. That's what I feel that should be done. So that's what I want to see being done. Then from there also move to other areas. I believe when you do that, then it will fast track the connectivity in Africa through all spectrums in that direction.
That's true. Because other than if we don't do that, then this vicious circle will
continue. Yes,
exactly.
yes. We can continue in silos. We shall continue in simple segments. And our adversaries want us to move in that direction. That bond is not welcome by some of our adversaries. But when you are aware that yes, there is that kind of roadblock, then you can know how to navigate around it. And I don't think that really anybody can stop us to move into that direction.
No one can stop that.
Yeah, I remember in history when the East African community was active before some leadership killed it of Idi Amin and Waseva.
Of course, now you have mentioned it, leadership.
The big brotherhood from Kenya, having that feeling that we can have our own ways.
I think Kenya has not gone away from that.
That's what yeah, you are right. We haven't run away from it. And that is what the current Secretary General of the, is it a secretary or something like that? The head of secretariat is some doctor from Kenya. No, the secretariat of EACA. You know, on recruitment, when Aunt Rebecca Kadaga was actually still, she is still, she had to communicate to him because the employment is supposed to be done
quotas, yes.
And the other one was just giving out jobs, not following the what. So she reminded him that, look, you are our employee. We only give you work and tell you how to do it. We have got a treaty that governs your work, and there are other operationalized ways of doing work. So please, don't again take us back, because be reminded, because you are not a young man, be reminded of exactly what failed the East African community in the first place.
Yes.
And I found that data very, very interesting and extremely important.
Yes.
I would want to keep it somewhere in a safe and keep reading it. But what is also of importance and great importance at that, I think we are making, I don't know if we are making parting shots,
Yes,
is that the truth of the matter, when you look at the African continent, the connectivity is still a problem. That even when we have got this internet that we are talking about, the penetration of the internet on the African continent is still limited. Even where it is prevalent like in the urban centers in Kampala. When you look at the gadgets that are supposed to be used to make sure that you do the work, they are also lacking. Even where they are, where we have them, we have not taken deliberate steps to make sure that we make the population supposed to use those gadgets, adapt to the relevant technology. But most importantly, this question of infrastructure goes beyond the roads, the railway, the air, the water, and we are looking at social infrastructure. Now, all that put together is still a very big challenge. I'm glad, though, that all hope is not lost. Because when you look at the agencies, African Union, East African Community, we are geared towards achieving the objectives within enhancing the infrastructural development for purposes of expanding our economies and other horizons.
Ndugu JJ, as we part, as we close down.
Yeah, I want to join my colleague that there is all the hope in Africa. One thing, Africa is one continent which has got resources. Across the globe, we have the richest number of resources. And also, number two, we have a population. And it's a matter of fixing that. And then we can be able to tap into that one to create wealth, which will be able to be driven into the infrastructure development and the transformation of Africa we want within the African framework of Vision 2063.
2063. Yeah, thank you so much, and the colleagues for the contribution in this discussion. I know there is a lot that needs to be looked at when it comes to the African, the connectivity ranging right from the road to railways to air to internet. All these things need to be addressed. But like you are saying, the issue of leadership needs to be looked at, because leadership is the lubricant.
Exactly.
For all this to be done. We need a leadership that can be able to carry Africa into the next phase. We thank you so much for the viewer who has been with us throughout all this time. Like we said in the beginning, that Kampala was threatening to rain. Actually, it was raining, and as we speak, many parts are still having that rain going on. And for those who missed waking up early for work, may be having problems and challenges with the traffic or lack of it. We will be getting back to you again next week on Friday, and we wish you the best of the weekend, and we pray that you'll be safe until we meet again next week, same time on the UBC. And because UBC is coming up to you with more programs, so please, we ask that you stay with us and don't go away. Have a good Friday and a good weekend till we meet. Thank you so much.
Asanteni basi. Mungu awabariki.